Hey everyone! So it's the end of February, which means it is time to talk about every book that I read in the past month, as well as which books I'm planning on reading in March. Starting off with the first book I read in February, or at least finished reading in February. I started reading this in January, which is Moby Dick. And I gotta say, I'm honestly surprised because I liked this book. I actually really liked this book, far more than I thought I would, because at the end of January, I was maybe about halfway through the book, and I thought it was okay, but I wasn't really enjoying it all that much. I thought the beginning of the book was really good, but then you get to maybe a third of the way through the book, and all of a sudden it just starts inundating you with a bunch of whale facts, whale biology, information about the whaling industry. And that's kind of something that a lot of people make fun of this book for, being like, oh, well, half of this book is just about whale facts, the whaling industry, and things like that. And while that is not entirely true, it definitely doesn't make up half this book. There is actually a good part of this book that really dedicates itself to whale facts, which for me, it was very, very boring, and I really hated how it took away the focus from the story, because I was really engaged with the story and the characters and the world and what was going on. Um, but then the author would just want to talk about whale facts in the whaling industry, and that was really driving me crazy. Uh, but then I kind of made it more entertaining for myself by constantly interrupting my wife when she's playing a video game, and I'm reading this book, being like, all right, time for whale facts. And that would annoy her too. So she got to kind of experience my annoyance with that as well, which made it slightly less annoying for me. But I do gotta say, I was surprised how much I enjoyed this book, even though there were certain aspects of this book that I really did not like. This book is not for everyone, though. I definitely wouldn't recommend the average reader to read this book, because it's a difficult read. I mean, the verbiage, the prose throughout this book is kind of hard to understand. It was almost like I had to kind of click my brain in a way like it was back in high school or college, where I was, actually reading books to learn things. Because this isn't necessarily an easy book to read. But after at least the first quarter of the book, at least for me personally, my brain did kind of click, and then it was easier to understand what was going on in the story, and really understand what the author was trying to tell us. This is, of course, an absolute classic, one of the greatest books of American literature ever. At least that's what everyone says. I wouldn't necessarily say that, at least not from my personal opinion. But I will say that I was surprised how much I did enjoy this book, even considering the various aspects of this book that I really did not like. The beginning of this book, I really, really enjoyed. I'd say the first third of this book, really good. The second third of this book, didn't really like it. And then the last third, and then especially the ending to this book, absolutely amazing. I love the way this book ends, how it all comes to a conclusion. Really, really fantastic. And that's probably why I like this book so much. I really like the beginning and really like the end. Kind of cut out a good section of the middle part of this book that focuses on whale facts and whale biology, the whaling industry. But if you can just get over that part, even though it is a good section of this book, I mean, at least 100, I mean, probably not 200, but at least 100 pages of this book is just dedicated to that. If you can get over that part, this is a very good book. But I definitely wouldn't recommend the average reader to read this book, because I'm not sure I'm pretty sure a lot of people would dislike this book, which, based off of my comments from last month when I said I was going to finish this, it sounds like a lot of you agree with me. A lot of you really don't like this book, or people love this book. There's no in between. And I gotta say, I actually really, really like this book, so that surprised me. The next book I read was a far, far easier book because I needed something easier and quicker to read than Moby Dick, because that was kind of a bear getting through. So I picked this, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Now this, again, is an absolute classic, just like Moby Dick. And even if you haven't read this book, I can pretty much guarantee you know at least the overall plot. Scrooge, he hates Christmas. He's a terrible person. He's a miser. All he wants is money, money, money. He doesn't want to help anyone. Then he gets visited by ghosts on Christmas Eve night, and based off of what the ghosts show him, what his past was, what his present is, and what his future could be, he changes the way he is. That being said, I already knew what I was getting into when I read this book because I've seen like all the movies that are based off of this book. So nothing about this book really surprised me. However, it still is a classic. I still really enjoyed it, but I already kind of knew what I was getting into. Still, an absolute classic. I really enjoyed it. And it's not Christmas time at all anymore. Now it's February. Now, by the time this gets posted, it's going to be March. But it's not Christmas time, but if you're looking for a Christmas book to read, a classic Christmas book, you can't do any better than A Christmas Carol. Really like this book, especially after reading Moby Dick. I needed something far easier, far quicker to read, and this really fit the bill for me, so I'm glad I read that after Moby Dick. Then the third book I finished in February is this, The Valley of Fear by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And this is a Sherlock Holmes book, as you could probably guess, based off of the author, or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He's, of course, the author of Sherlock Holmes. This is the final Sherlock Holmes book that I needed to read. I've now read every single Sherlock Holmes collection of short stories, as well as all of the novels. This is not a collection of short stories. This is a single novel that tells a story. I must say, I am an absolute huge fan of Sherlock Holmes. Everything I've read by Sherlock Holmes, I've really, really enjoyed, like a lot. Going into this book, and I normally don't do this, at least I try not to, but I kind of looked up, opinions of what this book were online to see where people ranked it, in comparison to all the other Sherlock Holmes books. And it was very interesting, and I probably shouldn't have done this, but I did. It's very interesting because people either have this at the way, way bottom of their list or the way, way top of their list. And for me personally, I gotta say, I'm gonna have to put this at the way, way top of my list. Probably not my favorite Sherlock Holmes novel, at least. I'm pretty sure, I think I would still go with The Hound of Baskervilles as my favorite Sherlock Holmes novel. My favorite collection of short stories maybe would be his Last Bow. That's really hard. All the Sherlock Holmes books are really good. This book is very different, though, even in comparison to the other novels, because the first half of this book deals with Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson as they're investigating a crime and figuring out what happens. And that's the first half of this book. And they figure out what happened at the crime at the halfway point of this book. So then you might be wondering, all right, it's a 200-page book. What's the other 100 pages? And the other 100 pages of this book is actually a flashback to tell the story of what happened before this crime took place. And I think that's why a lot of people don't like this book, because when you're reading Sherlock Holmes, the main thing you're going into is you want to read about Sherlock Holmes, how he solves the crime, and all the crazy twists and turns that, go along the way with that. And you get that for the first half of this book, but then the second half is just a flashback. But for me personally, I absolutely loved the flashback part of this book. I thought it was equally as good, if not better, than the first half that was dealing with Sherlock Holmes and the actual crime. Really fascinating, really gives a good backstory, really a big change of pace if you're used to reading Sherlock Holmes. Some Sherlock Holmes books, they do kind of delve into a little bit of the past to give you some backstory. This is a huge backstory you get, covering years and years of time to figure out what led up to this crime, why it happened, how it happened. I gotta say that I really like that flashback part of this book. And of course, the first half dealing with Sherlock Holmes and how he solves the crime, that as well was absolutely fascinating. And just like every good Sherlock Holmes book, there's a lot of twists and turns, and you don't know what's going to happen. And then you think it's going this way, and then bam, it goes the other way. And I love Sherlock Holmes, and I really like this book. Honestly, out of all the books I read in February, I'm going to put this as my favorite. Moby Dick as number 2. Really good book, surprisingly good book. And then A Christmas Carol as my 3rd favorite. Still a really good book, but, it didn't really surprise me. I already knew what I was getting into with the story, and, it's a really good book, though. It's still really good. Honestly, I think everyone should read that book. It's very quick, very easy. A great Christmas book. Now, I am currently in the process of reading a book. I am not yet done it, but it is this, Winter's Heart by Robert Jordan, which is book number 9 in the Wheel of Time series. Now, my opinion of the Wheel of Time has really changed a lot throughout the last couple of years as I've been reading it. The first book was fine. Second book, pretty good. Third, fourth, and fifth book, I think, were all absolutely fantastic. I can't remember if the 6th book was also fantastic or if that's when it started to go downhill. But then after that, I know the 7th book did not like. The 8th book, the last one, which is a Storm of Swords, I can't remember what it's called. I always get the titles mixed up. But the 8th book in the series, did not like it at all. I thought it was boring. And literally nothing happened in the story. There was like one tiny thing that actually happened, and then the rest was just, kind of setting up for things that are, in theory, going to happen in future books. But really boring, really, really slow read, and nothing happens. And I feel like that's been kind of at least the last 2, if not the last 3 Wheel of Time books I've read. This one, I don't want to pass judgment. I'm only, I'm not even halfway through the book. I'm getting there, though. I'm on page 200. The thing about Wheel of Time, you got to get at least to the 200 pages into the book before something big is going to happen. So far, nothing really big has happened in this book. I will say, so far, not to pass judgment because I'm not done it yet, so far I am liking it a little bit more than book 8, but again, I'm not really liking this book that much. And it's a shame because I was a really big fan of The Wheel of Time, and then as I read these later books in the series, I just feel like I'm no longer a fan of this series. And from what I've been hearing online, from what people tell me online is, yes, it does get better with the later books. You just kind of have to suck it up and deal and push through the middle part of this series to get to the really good books at the end. But man, that's rough, because I almost feel like I'm wasting my time reading these books when I have so many other books I need to read. But I do want to give it a chance because I was like so into the Wheel of Time. Like books 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, I can't remember. But those books were amazing. And 1 and 2 were good too. They were good. But now the series just going downhill. Maybe it's picking up a little bit with this one. And again, I don't want to pass judgment too much because I haven't finished this. But so far, I mean, I'm just not really feeling it. And that's a shame. But I'm going to keep at it. I'm planning on finishing this book in March. So this is going to be the first book that I read in March. And then after that, I'm going to need just a change of pace. So for the next book that I'm planning on reading is this. And this is Prelude to Foundation by Isaac Asimov. And I love the original Foundation trilogy. So Foundation, Foundation and Empire, and the third book, Second Foundation. I would arguably put that up there with Lord of the Rings as one of the greatest trilogies ever written, in my opinion. I thought it was absolutely amazing read. The first Foundation book was really good, but especially Foundation and Empire and Second Foundation, following the story of the mule, if you've read this series, oh, fantastic. I absolutely loved those books. They were so good. This book, Prelude to Foundation, as you can guess by the title, is actually a prequel to that original trilogy. So, after reading this Robert Jordan book, that's boring, honestly, I wanted to read something that at least I hope is going to be a far more entertaining read. And since I love the Foundation trilogy, I thought I would read this, Prelude to Foundation, which has been sitting on my bookshelf for months, maybe a year, that I've been meaning to read forever. And for some reason, I just haven't done it yet, even though I love the Foundation trilogy. So, after I finish Winter's Heart, Prelude to Foundation is going to be the second book that I'm planning on reading in March. And then the next book that I want to read in March is going to be this, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Now, this book, I really don't know anything about it, other than it's an absolute classic. I mean, everyone's heard of Oscar Wilde. He's written lots of really good short stories, novels, plays. This, I think, is one of his most popular novels, The Picture of Dorian Gray. I think it's one of his most popular novels. So that's really all I know about this story. And I'm kind of glad because I want to go into this not knowing anything. I have no idea what to expect about this story. I've never read anything by Oscar Wilde. Don't know anything about what this story even entails. I don't even know what genre it is other than fiction, but I don't know anything beyond that. So I do want to read this. It's an absolute classic. There is also, like, half this book is dedicated to A Picture of Dorian Gray, but it also includes like some short stories in here as well. I don't really plan on reading that. I mainly just want to read the novel itself in this book. I might go back and read some of the short stories or plays that are in this book as well, but for right now, I want to read just the novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, because it's an absolute classic, and I need to read something by Oscar Wilde. And again, just like Prelude to Foundation, this has been sitting on my bookshelf for months, if not a year, and that's the thing. I'm trying to get through these books that have just been sitting on my shelf forever before I read the books that I've bought more recently. And preferably, I'm trying not to buy many more books before I get through my backlog. You know how that goes, though. Not well. Now, assuming I can read all of those books in March, which I think I can. I mean, the Picture of Dorian Gray is not too long. I'm halfway through Winter's Heart, and Prelude to Foundation is kind of a thicker book. I don't know, how big is it? It's like 400-ish pages. 500 pages. I still think I can get through those books in March. And then assuming I do, Ta-da! Book number 10 in the Wheel of Time, Crossroads of Twilight. Like I said, I do want to continue reading through the Wheel of Time series. From what I've heard online, this is the worst book in the Wheel of Time series. That's all I really know about it, though. But after this book, starting with book 11, then the series supposedly really kicks back up and starts getting really, really good again. I don't have book 11, though, unfortunately. But I want to get through this because, again, it's been on my bookshelf forever. I do still technically kind of sort of consider myself a Wheel of Time fan, just not nearly as much as I did in the past. But I do wanna see if I can push through this series, even though they're long books. Like Winter's Heart's what, like over 500 pages. This is over 600 pages, so they're not short books. But I'm gonna give it a go. I'm gonna see at least if this book is as bad as people say. And honestly, now that I have my expectations lowered for what I believe these books to be, you know, I'm not going into these books thinking, oh yeah, Wheel of Time, these books are going to be absolutely amazing, like the first 5 or 6 books are. Now my expectations are lowered, so honestly, it kind of makes me enjoy them a little bit more because I'm going in thinking, oh, this book it's going to be terrible, and then I'm like, yeah, it wasn't very good, but it wasn't terrible, so that's okay. So, anyways, those right there are all of the books I'm planning on reading in March. Okay, sorry about that. My camera died. So, like I was saying, those are all the books that I'm planning on reading in March. Of course, I'm almost done reading Winter's Heart. But the other 3 do want to read. Don't think I'll get through Crossroads of Twilight, but maybe I'll get it started at least a little bit. And then these were, let me add Winter's Heart to this so it looks more impressive. These were, of course, the books that I read in February. We got The Valley of Fear, absolutely amazing. Maybe one of my favorite Sherlock Holmes books, at least in competition with The Hound of Baskervilles for my favorite. Really fantastic book. Moby Dick, again, another fantastic book. I've got to say, I was really surprised how much I enjoyed this book. I liked it far more than I thought I would have, especially when I was halfway through the book and I was thinking, it's okay, but it's getting in its way too much. And don't get me wrong, it does really get in its way a lot, but man, the ending of this book, absolutely fantastic. The first third of this book, really good, and then the last third of this book, absolutely amazing. So I was surprised how much I enjoyed that book. And then, of course, A Christmas Carol, again, like I said, an absolute classic, but I already knew what to expect going into this book. Really didn't surprise me, but still, fantastic book. And yes, those are the books that I read in February, and those are the books that I'm planning on reading in March. If you have any comments or questions, let me know down below, and I'll see you all again next week. Yeah. Bye.